Uh, Good evening. It's wonderful that we have Dunja Mijatović twice in the day. This is a great privilege because it means it's a real conversation for those of you who are here for the first half. And it's chapter 2, and I hope there'll be many more chapters with Penn. I think you all know, but I'll say it again. She's the representative on freedom of the media for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is made up of 57 member countries in Europe, Asia, and North America. And her reputation is that she is 24 hours a day working every day for the safety of journalists, media, pluralism, digital freedom. And so you are in effect a member of PEN, whether you like it or not. It's very moving for us. We often feel that we're different from other civil society organizations because we're a grassroots organization in over 100 countries. We have the money of the word, not money. So we have this great power, which means that 900 of us our colleagues are in prison, about 100 of us are killed every year. And we're not an interest group. We're a freedom of expression literary group. And we're fighting for it not for ourselves only, but for our readers, for the general public. And it's very important and moving for us to know that there are people like you who are essentially doing the same work we are. And I would just add one thing before turning the floor over to you, just as a continuation from some of the things that were said, particularly at the end of the preceding session. I think there was a question about responsibility of journalists and how do you make them more responsible, and I think that was answered very well. But one of our presidents, Heinrich Boll, who was a great, great writer, and I don't have the quote here, but it was more or less this: as a writer, and it's true for a journalist, you have to go to, T-O-O, you have to go too far in order to know how far you can go. And the definition of civilization is the ability of people to speak to each other, and speaking to each other in a real way means going too far all the time and not having to worry all the time about offending people. We all have to get used to being offended. That's part of living together. And Margaret Orford said about having a thick skin. We constantly say, writers have very thick skins. From our very first book, we're attacked by mad dogs doing our reviews. We have thick skins, we're used to it. And politicians have to develop much thicker skins. Their skins are getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and they think that anything that's said against them is somehow unacceptable. This is true everywhere. And these laws that are used to protect thin skins of journalists or businessmen or anybody are unacceptable. And I think we are a community of about 25,000 writers and many, many more who live the life of the thick skin. And you are a great defender of the thick skin principle. So I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I liked, defender of the ones with the thick skin. So it's also enormous pleasure and honor, really, to be invited and to be with all of you here today, distinguished delegates of PEN International. It's also quite significant, and I will remember what you said, that I'm already a PEN member. Even just it was in the air. It means a lot because I truly and really believe in freedom of speech and in the work I'm doing with my small team at the Organization for Security and Cooperation. I'm also very pleased to be in Kyrgyzstan. In Bishkek. This is not the first time. I've been here many times. I feel at home. I have many friends here, and I will continue coming and trying to improve the situation when it comes to media freedom in this country. We all gather here under the theme, my language, my story, my freedom. And we do it in a country and in a region in which these words play a very important role. I can say this because words play a very important role also in the country where I come from, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Balkans in general. And we all know how words can affect our lives. But I always think that those words should be floating freely, without governments and the powerful trying to restrict those words. The right to tell you the story brings me to my mandate as the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media. For many of you, in particular participants that come from the Southern Hemisphere, my institution might not be so familiar. As you already mentioned, we cover a big chunk of the world, countries that are different in their tradition, culture, certain values, but again, they gathered in one organization voluntarily, and when they joined the organization, they also voluntarily agreed that they will honor and value the commitments, and they gathered around security issues. And in a way, it was related to the Cold War. Nowadays, it has even bigger importance than it had almost 40 years ago when the OSCE was established. Part of this issue related to the security is a basket called Human Dimension. And in this basket, freedom of media and the institution that I had at the moment plays a part. And it is very much related to security matters. Why do I say this? And maybe PEN is not the right forum to talk about security, because we talk more about freedom of speech. But the way I see it is that we cannot talk about living in a secure societies if we cannot freely express ourselves and our minds. We cannot say that we live in a countries where freedom of speech is glowing and we can say whatever we want if we do not live in a secure society. So how to bring those two together and how to find a balance or a formula, because there is no security without respect of human rights. We cannot say, we are living in a bubble or in some kind of cage where nobody can attack us, but we cannot say a word about anything. We cannot criticize, we cannot express our disagreements with the government, with the powerful. And unfortunately, in too many states, this is what is happening. That is why I think OSCE has a very special role nowadays. And my small office is the youngest and the smallest institution in the structure, but we are the most loud ones. The most powerful tool that I have at my disposal, representing Intergovernmental Media Watchdog, is my voice. That's the only way governments pay attention to what I have to say when I see grave breaches of human rights in general in too many OSCE participating states. Literature, free speech and free media are a common currency, as the PEN Charter puts it, through which we connect and reach out to each other, through which we learn about the other side of the coin and learn to bridge divides. And it all sounds wonderful on paper. Also, the OSCE commitments on media freedom commitments and many other commitments, they sound wonderfully. When you read them, when you look at the paper, you are proud. We achieved resolutions, declarations, conventions. But in practice, what is happening is not reflecting those wonderful words. And this is what I see in too many international organizations, including United Nations, Council of Europe, OSCE, European Commission. We are all very courageous and very bold when we proclaim, these grand words. Yes, we are for free speech. We are to respect human rights. But then I started doing this job in 2010. I started traveling around the region, meeting the governments, and I again and again read those commitments and international declarations, and then I visited people in prison, and then I heard about journalists being beaten, harassed, threatened, their families threatened, their friends, and then I asked myself, why is this profession of a journalist and a writer so dangerous? Why are words so dangerous for so many in living in so-called democracies. Why I say so-called, it's not very diplomatic. I represent an organization that has 57 participating states from Vancouver to Vladivostok. And when we gather in Vienna, when we meet, we call ourselves Club of Democracies. I do not know about any democracy that has journalists and writers in prison. I do not know about any democracies that is beating journalists on the street and calling themselves democracy. That doesn't go together. That has to be, in a way, cleared. Of course, I'm also very realistic, coming from the part of the world that I come from, and that changes cannot happen overnight, and that we need to do much more. But we need to show more courage and more boldness in our interactions with the governments, no matter how much it hurts. I do not think you can have too many changes if you do not call things the way they should be called. I'm not known for being too diplomatic in my interactions with the government, because I do not think there is no need for a quiet diplomacy if a journalist is in prison. He has to be, or she has to be, released. Of course, I hear on many occasions that those people are not in prison because of their journalistic or activities of writers. They are there because they are hooligans, drug dealers, and terrorists. Of course, we have to be careful. And I do respect legitimate right of any government to fight threats, to protect our societies. But I looked at the cases, I examined the issues and the reasons these people were imprisoned or beaten, and I do not see any threats. I just see that they've been very bold, courageous, provocative, raising the issues in their society of corruption and criminal, touching the powerful, not necessarily the government, it can be industry, and ending up in prisons. My title is OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media, and sometimes I'm told do not engage in issues that are related to bloggers, social media activists, and I disagree. I think anything to do about free speech has to be in my mandate, or no matter whoever is dealing with this mandate in the future. Also the way my predecessors dealt with the cases. We cannot suddenly forget about these people that are in a way called newcomers. They are engaging in open journalism. For the first time ever, we have an audience that is active and not passive, and we should embrace it. We should try to find ways to accept this in our society, to accept people being more exposed, interacting with each other, and not trying to restrict this. Unfortunately, we tend to forget the lessons of history, recent and the history from many years ago, and how important it is to maintain this free flow of information and this free and independent media environment. We, in a way, take it for granted. When I say we that are more in a better situation because we live in the countries where it is allowed to say things that in many parts of the world it is not allowed. To be a journalist, a writer, is unfortunately still a very dangerous profession. After 5 years of observing the media freedom situation in the OSCE participating states, it is appalling to me that telling a story or conveying a message is a dangerous activity in many of our nations. And what I see also as a potential threat is a threat to investigative, courageous journalism. There are less and less of those who are willing to engage in this kind of journalism. It's a self-censorship, economy, and many other dangers. And in this, I think PEN has to play a very important role. Trying to bring back dignity to this profession in so many parts of the world, because the way journalists are treated in many countries is absolutely unacceptable. I always wanted to be a journalist. I tried, but I failed, and it didn't work. I realized I cannot do this job. you need passion, you need talent, and you need dedication. And I moved immediately to other side of journalism and free speech, defending it but from a different perspective and from a different angle. And in this process, I even learned more how important it is and how much journalists can do in order to open our eyes and to reveal the problems in our societies. Literature, in a way, plays the same but a very different role. Literature is something like an oxygen in any society. We need it, we have to digest it, and we have to observe it. But journalists, they work on a daily basis. They run to different parts of the country or a state or a city in order to tell us stories about our daily life. And this all together brings more freedom to our society if it is allowed. If it is suppressed, the whole society, they just go in a dark and some closed societies that we hopefully do not want to see in the future. In my daily work, I have seen the assaults on free expression over several years, and there are several categories that I would like to mention. The first one is violence and threats of violence against journalists. The second one is obstruction of critical reporting by the authorities, both in traditional media and online. And third is legislative restrictions limiting the ways critical opinions can be accessed or expressed. I urge you to follow the work of my office on Twitter and Facebook, just in order to get a feeling on how difficult it is to be a journalist nowadays in 57 participating states of the OSCE. Of course, we have to look at the situation in a broader region, but if you look at just 57 and you see which kind of cases we are raising on a daily basis, it is scary. While assaults are observed across the OSCE region, in no country has the safety of journalists become more critical than in Ukraine. And I have to mention it because we are very much engaged in this process, and I believe it is appropriate to say a few words about the situation there. We have journalists being killed, harassed, detained, kidnapped, almost on a daily basis. In a recent period, we had several statements in relation to freedom of the media in Ukraine, and this is reflecting, and the problems there are reflecting to the region and beyond when it comes to freedom of the media in general. Safety of journalists, restrictive legislation, propaganda, and all these things that we thought are not possible to happen in 21st century. This crisis exemplifies the fact that the deterioration of media freedom and the rise of propaganda often go together to escalate conflict. I went to Crimea in March this year, and I sensed it immediately. It was clear to me that it started as the information war. More than 50 Ukrainian channels were switched off in less than 2 weeks, just as a start. I will not bother you too much with Ukraine, but I think we should all think twice and look at everything that is happening there in order to be able to try to avoid similar situation in the future. But as I said, unfortunately, it seems to me that as a society we keep forgetting how difficult it is to live in such situation when conflict, murders, and fights are something that is daily life of people. While the issues at the fore in Ukraine are indeed a dark reminder for all of us about how quickly the media freedom landscape can darken, they are not the only challenge we face as advocates of free media and free expression. I will briefly touch upon several things. As our recent session illuminated so well, prison remains an option to be used against dissident voices across the world. And this is happening on a daily basis, OSCE or not OSCE countries. There is no room in prison for those whose only crime is to speak their convictions. But indeed, as much as we try, the campaign to decriminalize defamation, as we heard, moves at a glacial pace. In some nations, dreadful backsliding has taken place where government officials, you have issues such as the flags or other symbols have special privileges against dissent. Politicians, always mindful of using this kind of language, now adopt laws that criminalize the distribution of false information, leaving that vague phrase to be defined by judges in courts that are beholden to ruling parties. The real crime is that these laws are still on the books. I have seen the results of these laws, and I have visited prisoners in Turkey and Azerbaijan. One of the writers I visited was is a PEN member, Nedim Şener, and at that time I also visited Ahmet Sheikh. They are both released now, but charges are still pending in relation to their case. And there are many journalists in prison still in Turkey and in Azerbaijan. And there are journalists under house arrest in Macedonia. And there are several journalists that are waiting for justice to be served in relation to the cases where they were beaten and threatened on the streets. Across the globe, there is a growing recognition that our privacy is being invaded by governments and non-state actors at a level deemed impossible. In an effort to fight the legitimate threat of terrorism, governments have exploited personal data on all of us, violating our rights in an effort to find a needle in a haystack. I don't have to express an opinion on whether such data mining is legal or good policy. I can tell you that it is wrong to threaten and to punish those whose crime is to bring to the public's attention these invasive activities. I would like to mention UK paper Guardian. The British authorities' actions against the Guardian, including the demand that its staff destroy electronics in their possessions containing information on US data collection efforts or face criminal prosecution, is a chilling reminder that in this new world it is dangerous to be even a messenger of information. And let me leave you today with this thought. Much of the discussion here today centered on disturbing and bad news. But that is the nature of our business and our lives. And we see it, as we say again, east and west of Vienna. We see it in the countries that are so-called old democracies, but we see it also in the countries that are new emerging democracies. We are protectors of and proponents for freedom. And PEN is one of the leaders in this process. It is quite natural to be on the defensive because across the world there are institutional forces that oppose free expression and free media, now more than maybe 10 years ago. There are success stories, and I try to reveal them all the time, but unfortunately not too many success stories. We know that. And the past 25 years have brought truly unbelievable changes to many places in the world, including right here in Kyrgyzstan, where in 1990 I doubt that we'd be holding this meeting and having this discussion. Thank you very much.